Probably the easiest way to get started using AJAX is to simplify things down to what's called AHA, the asynchronous HTML and HTTP. So in this mini project, we're going to take some HTML fragments and load them into this div when we click one of these links. Now the links surround the image and all the text. So let's say that for any of these flowers, we have a full page that gives a long description of the kinds of arrangements that are available and all that kind of stuff. Those pages don't actually exist. If you click, you'll see nothing happens. But let's assume that they're there for the purposes of this project. What we want to do here is load up a short description that we can just show over here in the sidebar. So let's take a look at the HTML and start putting this together. Here we are in the example file. Now I'm going to need a couple of things. First, I'm going to need to look at the HTML for these flowers. So I have these links that surround the images and the text and everything here. And there's a link to my non-existent full description page, which we don't currently care about except to know that it exists for accessibility in case JavaScript isn't available. And there's a different one for each of these. Also, we have our description area. I'm just going to copy its name because I know I'm going to need it later. And this is where we're going to put the HTML that we load from our external files. And the last piece of the puzzle that I'll need is the HTML fragments. These are pre-built for you and loaded into a folder called fragments in the exercise files for this movie. Now we'll go down to the JavaScript. So I have an event listener already built up for you. We're just selecting the flower items area, then finding each link, and we've hooked up a click event. So the first thing I'm going to do is disable the default action of following the link. And now what we need to do is load up the HTML fragment that goes with the link that we clicked and load it into that area. So we'll start with an easy case. We'll just load the same fragment up no matter which link is clicked. Now I keep using the word load up, and that's appropriate because we're actually going to use the jQuery load method. This is a shorthand version of another built-in method called AJAX. The built-in AJAX method can do anything you need with respect to AJAX-y stuff. However, it's pretty complicated, it has a ton of options, and so the jQuery developers have also included some simpler methods. One of them is load, and it's built expressly for this purpose, for loading up HTML fragments into an element on your page. So what we need is to select the element, which is flower description. That's an ID. And so we're going to take the contents of any of these fragments. So I'm going to use the lilies one to start out. So I'm going to type the path fragments and then lilies.html. So what'll happen here is when I click this link, any of them, jQuery is going to retrieve the contents of this file for me and then load it into this area, handling all the AJAX details by itself. So I'll save this, switch back to my browser, and reload. I'm using Safari for this example because it's not affected by the same security issues that affect Chrome with respect to AHA and AJAX stuff when you're working on local files. This is the same issue that we ran into in the color box example. So I have the same event listener hooked up on all four of these. So when I click any of them, there it is. The contents of my little HTML fragment have been loaded up here in the sidebar, and it does not change regardless of which of these I click. Just to prove that, I'm going to reload this and click the sunflower, reload again, click the iris. So you can see everything is loading the same file. So that's great. We are now able to use AHA to load that HTML fragment, but of course it's not the right one. So now we need to break this down and load different ones depending on which of these we clicked. So I'm going to use a switch statement. This is JavaScript that will look at a single value, and then we can take different actions depending on what that value is. So what I'm going to look at is the href of the link. So you may remember each of these has a different href. We could also do this by adding classes or something like that, but I'm just going to do this leaving the HTML as it is. So we're going to look at this, which in this context is the link that was clicked. And I'm going to look at its href attribute. And depending on that value, I'm going to take different actions. I'm going to be updating this description every time. So I'm going to set a variable and just save that here. Okay, so the first one, the link is cala.html. And when I've clicked that one, that's when I'm going to load this one. And in a switch statement, in my case block, I take any actions I want to take, and then I break. So we're going to do this 4 times because there's 4 images. Now let's take a look back at the browser. Okay, for the sunflower, I want sunflowers.html, then iris.html, and, oh boy, alstroemeria.html. So sunflowers, iris, and alstroemeria. And then I'm going to load up a different fragment for each one of these. The fragments are called sunflower, irises, and Peruvian, using something that's a little easier for me to pronounce. Okay, so in the switch block, we're looking at the href and then loading up a different fragment depending on which of the links was clicked. So I'll save this, switch back over, and reload. And lo and behold, it works. And this allows you to keep your fragments, these little bits, outside of this single file, which can be nice, especially in the context of, say, a content management system or something like that, where keeping separate editorial control over different fragments might be useful to you. And of course, these don't have to be static files. It can be anything that generates HTML. So you could have a PHP file that does a bunch of programmatic magic and then generates some HTML and sends it out. You can make a request to that PHP application, take its HTML results, and load them right in. So that's how to use the load method to grab HTML out of either a static file or some other place that generates HTML and load it right into your page, easy as pie.